here's the challenge. And I know we've had a chat. Who's been on a couple of presentations in the room? I can remember some faces. So the challenge always pops up is, here's the thing, as a coach, we need to have the clarity. Are we developing in a performance philosophy to a critical path in performance, or are we doing leisure? So the athletes that we got in front of us, are they people that just like to turn up because they just like having a bit of fun, but they have no desire to put the work and time in? They turn up late now and again. They don't do the homework when they should when they go away. They don't follow their nutrition plans. They don't do their rehab or their prehab mobility unless someone's watching them. So for me, that's not performance coaching. For me, that's leisure coaching. So we've got to decide, first of all, what are we doing? Are we doing both, or are we defining the differences? Secondly, let's find out what the athletes think they're on. Do they think they're a performance athlete or a leisure athlete? And then let's get them to raise their awareness to, well, actually, if you're performance, this is what a performance athlete looks like. If you're leisure, this is what it looks like. So let's look at your behaviour, not your words, and let's start to define actually the journey you're on, because the journey we're on will define where you're going to end up. Your behaviour, not your words, will define your actions, your results. And then we can start developing that, raising the awareness to say, well, who's owning this? Where do we go? And you've heard of the GROW model, haven't you? I'm sure you've all heard of that in coaching, and we've adapted that a bit to add an S on it for the strategy, to identify people's will. But it boils down to this again. Are you willing to have the courage when you agree things to follow them through in every single coaching session? Or do you want to compromise on it and go, well, that's going to be conflict there, so I don't want to cover it. I'll let them off this time. I know we should be doing this, but let's do this because the guys don't really want to do this today. Oh, that person hasn't done what they need to, but I'll let them off this time. How many did you say you were parents in the room? So what happens with one of your children when you ask them to tidy the room up and then they don't tidy the room up and you go, I'll leave it this time, and then they don't tidy the room up again and you leave it again this time, then you're having a bit of a bad day and they don't tidy the room up and you go, I told you to tidy the room up, right? So what's the answer comes back when you're erratic with maintaining standards? What happens with them? What's the reaction you get? Yeah, it was all right last week. You know, what's wrong with you? Type of process. So two things don't happen is, what we haven't done is defined what the standards are and they've bought into them, what they look like and why we're doing them. And then what we do is we just help guide them to maintain the standards. But leisure coaching is letting people do whatever they want to do without any standards that they've pre-agreed. So in this room now, if you reflect, would you say you're a performance coach or a leisure coach? It's a question. Are you doing a bit of both? Are you trying to do the same in one session? Have you got leisure athletes, not based on what they want, based on their behaviour, and performance athletes together in the same session? So that's something you have to deal with, and now before you can move on. I've worked with Super League teams and Premiership League teams that have leisure athletes in the team. They're leisure athletes, not performance athletes, because their behaviour is not defining a performance attitude and actions as a performer and athlete. They're following a leisure philosophy. Have you experienced that yourself, even at the highest level? So what we're talking about here is we're saying, hang on, if we're going to get people to get the results we want, we've got to actually raise their awareness to get them to take ownership of what path they're on and then help them stay on it. Does that make sense, where we're going with that? It's massive. It's probably the biggest hit for me that I come across in all sports. But we're almost the gatekeepers of that, but they've got to own it. But they've got to raise their awareness to what path they're actually on, not by words, but by their actions. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, I'm going to chuck these on. These are just slides, and I'm just going to let you read them up there. And here's some questions for you that will connect with what we're talking about. There's 3 slides. Just keep thinking, the people you're working with, do they have to do this? Unsupervised. Make some funny noises when you're near the end. That's good. Any other noises? We near the end. Are we there? Okay, so how many yeses to those, the athletes you're working with? Yes. Loads, okay. So unless you're some sort of superhuman coach that wakes them up in the morning, dresses them, put their kits in a bag for them, go shopping with them, cook for them, make sure they do their revision at home on the knowledge and skill stuff they need to do their mobility if they've got those movements, do their rehab, prehab if they've got any, get them to the training session, get their state right for them, get them to make decisions for themselves, and importantly, then when they compete, you're doing it for them. They don't have to compete. You're getting in the boat and doing it for them. You're getting on the pitch and doing it for them. They have to do it. So all the time we're looking at, how do we get people to perform under pressure? But what we're doing is we're asking ourselves, are they actually developing the right behaviours when I'm not around, when the coach isn't around? That actually will determine the habits and the attitudes and the actions they get. What's your impact time you have with your coaches? Some of you lucky enough, some of you in this room lucky enough to see your athletes 6 times a week. Let's go for hands up for 5 times a week, 4 times a week, 3 times a week, less than 3 times a week. Okay, so would we say the vast majority of their time is spent without you being there? So therefore, if we're ever going to get great results, whether it's whatever their goal is, whose responsibility is it going to be to actually do the things they need to do to get where they want to go? It's theirs the whole time. So here's the key point. If when we're in a training environment, we haven't defined what they really want, haven't identified how much commitment they have to it, haven't actually get them to say what they're going to do in order to get there and us help them, and then make sure they stay on that path, all we're going to end up doing is we're going to control the impact time we have, which isn't enough time to ever get them to any type of performance outcome where they're going to compete with the best and they're going to beat them. It just will not happen. And it's the same challenge we had within the military concepts as well. The reality is, what's the Stephen Covey saying? Begin with the end in mind. So we're looking at where do we want to get to? Okay, but what do we need to do working back in order for that to happen? But it's most of their time, they have to do it on their own. So what we've got to do is the impact time we have with them, are we best influencing their learning, their behaviour, their motivation, their desire for them to do what they need to do to get where they need to be? Not for us to control the training sessions, to give them the answers. And that's the video clips Mike's going to show. He's going to show him and how fantastic he is as a coach to actually admit that he wasn't coaching well. This was a guy that's an international coach for years, realising he was telling the players what to do because it made the session run smooth. But then when it came to competition, the player wasn't making the right decisions because the coach made the decisions for them in training. And then they go, well, I've told them 100 times. How many times have you heard that? And they're still not doing it because you're making the decisions for them. Well, guess what? You can still make the decision for them when you're watching them compete because they haven't been able to practice that in a training environment under different levels of pressure. So that was my big thing when we're starting to work within the training and development of coaches. Now, when we're looking at the buy-in, I'm going to show you Mike's video in a second. This statement connects to the fact of there's no perceived value in learning if there's no desire to learn. So we've talked about the why, the what and the how. You've probably heard it on so many coaching courses, but sometimes the most simplest things are the most effective. You need to make sure, not by telling, by asking and challenging, why are you going to do something based into what's important to them, their goal. If they can't answer that question, what's that going to tell you? If they can't answer the question of something that's important to them, why are we doing it, linked in, they don't see the value in it. So when you're not watching, what do you think they're going to do? They're not going to do it. That goes for their nutrition plan. It doesn't matter what they're doing, their exercise plan, their skill work they've got, it doesn't matter. So you can't move on and start the session. Simple. And you need to spend time to get them to understand why the benefit is linked to them. So it's no good you standing there and saying, this is why we're doing this, guys. Anyone got any questions? And they'll go, oh. You still don't know if they've got it. That's why you need to challenge them. Okay, what we're going to work on today is this. Okay, so why is this so important linked into your goal? How's it going to give you a massive influence, and what's going to be the impact if we don't get this nailed? And see if they can answer, quantify it, and they go, great, now we can move on. So we've got the will first, and we're always back to this. How many sessions have you seen where we think, well, they should know? Well, they're definitely they're professional athletes, so they'll be interested in this, they'll know this. They know they need to do this. How do we know they know? We don't know they don't know because we haven't asked them. See the connection? So one of the things that comes up, and I was with a team yesterday actually, and one of the things came up with the coaches was, says, we haven't got time. So then we videoed the session and we said, well, okay. So then what do you think they had to do 3 or 4 times through the session? They had to stop the session and keep telling them. So we looked at the time spent now that could have been reduced if we just got this bit nailed at the beginning. We would have saved 20 minutes in the session just by spending 5 minutes at the beginning. So it's not wasting time, it's actually that you can't afford not to do that process.